Okay, right. So I hope you enjoyed the film. We really enjoyed making it, didn't we? It was a fantastic time. Now, I've been involved with the Pendle Witches for so many years. I'd say it was part of my upbringing because I'm from Lancashire. At Pendle, for some reason, when I was a kid, we always used to go up Pendle Hill and just climb it. I don't know why I was there, to be honest, because I was only a kid, but it was enjoyable. But it was that much part of the community. And it kind of still is, you know, it's the zeitgeist, it's still in there. And it was 2000, it was on the 400th, is it not long enough, on the 400th birthday of the Pendle Witches.
Holocaust, you know.
You what?
Holocaust.
That's better, isn't it? Yeah. Because these are the ones that had to be turned off because of upstairs, or we're a bit frightened of them now. So if I start jumping up and down. So, short story short. Questions? Anybody got any questions? And we'll try and
Can I just add to that what you said? When Neil said to me, do you want to do a project on the Pendle Witches thing? I said, like, it's been done a million times already. But the only way it hadn't been done was from the perspective of someone who actually believes that magic is real. Because it was real. It actually was real in some of the cases there. And I said, I'll do it for that reason. And I can remember the first time I was in Pendle, I was about 18. I was backpacking. And I immediately felt this tremendous energy in the area and knew nothing. I never heard of this story. I didn't know anything about it. And then someone years later told me, oh, no, there's a famous witch trial around there. So it had that psychometric infusion in the landscape. And you only get that where you actually have a strong, genuine spiritual tradition, like in ancient churches, certain megaliths, and certain landscape areas. And that was the one thing. And then I saw a documentary, I think it was made by BBC a good while ago, about 15 years ago, and they were very hostile towards these people. They portrayed them very badly. They weren't all sugar. You know, there was the patriarchs were kind of dark, and that was the world they lived in. You had to survive somehow. But they tried to portray everyone. There was absolutely no sympathy for the bystanders, and they didn't even seem to care about the kids who were, you know, one of them was a disabled boy who was, you know, mentally a challenged boy who was hanged, and they glossed over that. So I said, that's the thing I'll do. I says, we'll do it for that reason. The one, that the magic is actually real, and two, you know, let's tell it that this was basically a massacre, you know, and they were a handy target for some guy's career. And it also mirrored what's going on the last 3 years, where you have bureaucrats and civil servants out of control. So you have this Roger Noel guy, who would have loved the pandemic, you know, because it would have given him that. So I thought it was the right time to tell it was now. So I just wanted to add that to what you were saying.
Yeah, I mean, when the pandemic was on, we were saying this is just like the Pendle Witch trials.
Yeah. Bureaucracy, yeah.
Yeah, you stole everything I was going to say now. So, first question.
Great film. Thanks, both of you,
Thank you.
And everyone involved. It's great. I was going to ask what you just answered, Thomas, about modern parallels and echoes, and you mentioned the bureaucracy. But in the book, in the last chapter, you write about Shakespeare and how he wrote Macbeth 6 years prior to these events. So I just wondered if there were any modern magical parallels coming through in the culture that you wanted to talk about.
Shakespeare had written plays commissioned by King James, and the most obvious being Macbeth. The three witches were taken. You see, this is another aspect of the story, is that they took paganism as well, and kind of, you know, it was almost like the last chance to get at there were remnants of paganism in these agrarian communities. And he based the three weird sisters in Macbeth, the three hags. Our whole impression of the evil witch comes from that. You know, that look, that kind of like, you know, toil and bubble, all that kind of thing. That comes directly from Shakespeare and Macbeth and the three weird sisters.
They mentioned that in the trial as well, didn't they?
Who were based on the three fates of Greek paganism and the Norns of. So it was a way to get paganism as well.
Remember during the actual trial when they were describing Chattox, and they were described how she was hideous of face and all that sort of. It's the same sort of thing.
Yeah, and the same thing, like the parallels today. Well, they don't need Shakespeare. They've got the entire mass media that basically worships politicians as gods these days. And here's a classic example. If you, at certain points, if you didn't have a mask, you were considered almost subhuman. You were looked upon in the same way. You were looked in a kind of, it was a way of dehumanizing you. Don't have your face covered, you're a granny killer. And their whole concept of this whole scandemic thing was a kind of witchcraft, you know. You're basically, you know, there's this thing you can't see, but only they can protect you from it. And, you know, who was the guy here, Hancock?
Yeah.
He was the Roger Knowles, you know. Life is amazing how parallels always come back. And, you know, that's one of the things that me and Sarah on Hocus Pocus talk about a lot, is that if you know about this stuff from the past, they're less likely to get you today. And I bet everyone in this room has that kind of like magical hauntological childhood or teenage years when you grew up and you started to learn about things. It almost gives you not a psychic firewall, but a kind of cognitive firewall where you know, oh, they're doing it again. They're doing it again. Even if you don't verbalize it in your head, you kind of instinctually know it.
It's that thing about you should have a look at your dark side as well, isn't it? Because I think if we were all taught to study our dark side and to recognise it for what it is and not be fearful and accept it, then we would know these things existed. And they wouldn't surprise us. It's because it's like a psychological element that keeps coming back and back and back over the years, when it's the same thing.
And another thing too, it's very frightening when you read about these risk trials, not particularly even the ones on these islands, but particularly the ones in Scandinavia and Germany, is the officialdom of it. They would bring in a local prosecutor who wouldn't be like what Vincent Price was in that movie, Witchfinder the General. He'd be nothing like that. He'd be like, well, ladies, you know, this is a very serious charge. I'm here representing the law, and we have to go through the protocols. Oh, yes, yeah, yeah, you might have a mole there. And the officialdom of it is what's absolutely terrifying.
You just have to look at the Inquisition, don't you?
Yeah, you'd actually feel better if it was like Vincent Price in that movie. You'd actually feel better about it, because then you would know what you were dealing with. But if you look at there was one town in Sweden that was exterminated, literally depopulated, based on this like civil service document. It's incredible how it was. And you see that again today. You know, the coldness of bureaucracy.
Next. There must be loads of people who want to have questions about Pendle Witch.
It's more to do with actually the law today, because of the Witchcraft Act was cancelled at the beginning of this century. I don't know if you know, but the Labour government actually revoked it. So now when you do like tarot cards or anything like that, you're actually meant to make you're meant to make like a public announcement type of thing that it's for entertainment purposes only. So technically the Witchcraft Act is back in force today. So and also when you was mentioned about the Norns and to do with DNA, because there's 3 strands in DNA that take away the weave within the DNA that they found out. So it's interesting that behind it is a very deep, true knowledge, like with life and stuff. So I just wanted to sort of make that comment to do with witches, and there's that what's happened today.
Yeah, thanks. No, that's brilliant. Thanks, yeah. No, that's great. Statements are good as well.
See, what was interesting about when the first Witchcraft Act was passed by, a very minor one by Henry VIII, all the way through Queen Elizabeth, there was prosecutions, but death sentence was almost zero. It was just, the chance of being killed for it. You might get the pillory, or you might get, but to be actually killed was very, very rare. It wasn't until James came along. But what's also interesting too, and a lot of that had to do with the gunpowder plot. It was part of the paranoia like you got against Muslims in America after 9/11. It was like that. But it's so weird that when Rudolph II of Bohemia died, who was Mr. Magic, he had this alchemical empire out of Prague. When he died, that's when it almost switched over, and people like King James and other monarchs around Europe, particularly like Lutherans and stuff like that, went crazy on witches. It was almost like, it's the strangest thing, like one reality ended and another one began, and then they started killing witches rather than putting them in prison.
Mike.
Probably ties into just what you said there, Thomas. I'm just wondering about whether James I was motivated by his puritanical beliefs or by actual fear of witches. And if it was fear, then it would kind of validate that magic works and that the belief in it was actual at that time.
I only heard about half of that. Could you give me a synopsis, Neil? I only heard the first half.
I think we're saying that maybe, I'm asking a question, maybe James had like what do you call it, the disgust factor, and he wore the fear factor a bit towards witches.
James had a...
maybe afraid, or was it the puritanical? Because the puritanical beliefs can lead to that disgust effect, can't it? And then you start going against it.
He was raised by the Kirks in Scotland, who were Calvinists. And, Calvinism is a pretty intense religion. Basically everyone goes to hell. That's basically how it works. And he was raised in those Kirks in Scotland. But he also seemed to have a neurosis about it. He went to Denmark and he saw some witch trials there and was very impressed by it. And on the way back to England, him and his new bride were nearly killed in a storm, which were blamed on witches. And he personally watched and went to these events. Now, you could say there was something kinky might be going on there, sort of like an S&M sadomasochistic kind of fetish. Maybe, I don't know. I think he genuinely was trying to rid the country of the land of witches. At the end of his life, he even was quite critical against the witch trials and how how the actual interrogations were done. He said that many innocent people have went to the gallows based on, poor investigations. So even he, towards the end, kind of softened down. I think a lot of it, I often wonder about his wife. If his wife was the one who was edging him on, they're feeling that their marriage was somehow cursed by witches. He wasn't a black and white man by any accounts. He wasn't like, this like sort of tyrant. He was quite an interesting and well-educated man, but he was definitely affected by these neuroses, definitely.
You know that he was a mason. He was Perth and Scone, so he was initiated into. So he must have gotten involved in rituals and things. It wasn't as if he was totally against them altogether. He couldn't have been a Freemason.
Yeah, because we had more time in the book. They were also very superstitious, the royals. They used to wear things called gauges, which is a ring that was actually passed down from like Roman times that protected the monarch from being cursed by witches. So they had magic, but they wouldn't allow us to have it. That's another aspect to it as well, that the aristocrats and the elites, you hear that all the time today, don't you? They're allowed access to sorcery that we're not. It's forbidden to us. Half a dozen of Sweetley's books are about that. But there was also the other thing was the minting of, we called this in the book, the minting of coins. They only show the sovereigns one eye. It's a patriopathic magic so they can ward off the evil eye. That's why they always show the sovereign from the profile, never the two eyes looking forward.
Then there's the whole thing, they can use the magic and they take a lot of strength from it. So one thing they'd want to make sure is that we don't use it. So it's demonized, literally demonized.
Yeah, they're actually terrified of us knowing this stuff. And every so often they go on rampages. Remember, the English Witchcraft Act only ended, I think it was in the late 40s. And people were still going to prison for it in the 40s. And there was one particular high-profile case of a woman that they were worried that she was actually leaking secrets to the Germans during the war. But it was on the statute books. They believed that even as late as the 40s, they were prosecuting people over it. You know, and you had people like Dion Fortune and Dennis Wheatley writing books about it. But in the books, God always triumphs. So they were like, especially they were whistleblowers, especially Wheatley's books. You know, that's all the complex rituals are all in there. But at the end, Richelieu beats them, and God triumphs, and that was how they got around it.
Anybody else? Anybody else?
Hello, Thomas. You were saying earlier that, they're trying to deny the future and stuff, and I was wondering how many people here whose senior schools have been knocked down. Because I remember doing art class in school, and I drew a massive needle, and it had a cross at the end, and I put a devil's face inside it in school, and all the other kids in school used to do mad, crazy drawings in school. And I was just wondering how many other people's schools have been knocked down, and if they were just doing this to research because they thought we could see what's going to happen in the future.
Yeah,
Is this why schools have been knocked down? Both my schools have been knocked down, both my schools have gone.
Could you repeat it again, Neil? It's the speakers are there, and I only get to hear half the questions.
So you were saying that you had a talent at school that was... yeah. Right, so a lot of that creativity that might have been... and that just gets knocked out of you. Yeah, well, I think that's definite, isn't it? Yeah. But that's the same with all sorts of spirituality, isn't it? You're not allowed to have it. It's got to be knocked out of you. It's same thing we were saying about the whole witch thing, wasn't it?
Yeah, well, the creativity is white magic when you think about it, you know. It's the antidote.
Yeah, that's exactly what magic is, isn't it? I have an idea and I'm going to make it happen.
Yeah. You know, and it definitely during the last few years we have been like in a sea of sorcery. You know, they're creating a false reality, absolutely, and it's gaslighting, but it's also the epitome of black magic. You don't really, your own will is being turned against you, not to us here, but I mean to the average person.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, the difference is not I have an idea, I'm going to make it happen. I have an idea, I'm going to make somebody else make it happen. Yeah. And that's where you cross the line, really.
And also in witch hunts, you know the way they got people here during the lockdowns to report on their neighbours, right? Yeah. If your neighbour isn't, this kind of nonsense, right? Well, that was done in the witch hunts as well, and it was often done through petty grievances, like, he has a better donkey than me. Literally that, or he's got like the wheels on his wagon are really good, and I've got crap ones, and then he would go down to the magistrate and say he's a witch.
And that was happening in the Inquisition
and it
all the
happened
time.
Here during the lockdowns as well, just the petty grievances. And you know that you didn't have it in Ireland, but you had to hear the pot banging routine. What do you think that was? Who's the witch? The one who's not banging the pots.
It was me then.
Yeah, they used their same old tricks over and over again.
I bet we didn't bang many pots, did we? Anyone? Yeah, okay.
The Order of the Garter is the royal coven, and Henry VIII had to flee the field of gold because when he was dancing he dropped the garter.
You answer that one.
Did he drop? Say that again. Who dropped the garter? Henry VIII. Did he do it on purpose? No. Dancing. Yeah. Well. Yeah. Well, all those different organisations, they have like the Order of God, they're all... Yeah. Yeah, they all are, aren't they? All those organisations are all... And Winston Churchill is... Yeah, the Druid. Anybody else? Oh, there we go.
Yeah, brilliant, wonderful film. Just came into my mind because I'm a bit of a researcher, and I did a lot of research on the power of sea salt.
Yeah.
I did an awful lot of research, and I know why we've been told in the UK, lower salt, because it expands your consciousness, but it is the protector, the healer, and the cleanser. So I just wondered whether that has come in at all in research, whether it's the Pendle, which is, trying to protect or whatever. Are you worth your salt? Yes, you are. Anyway, I just thought I'd throw that in. All right.
I'm glad you brought that one up. Have you heard the latest? The FDA in America is putting through a bill through Congress to replace natural salt with synthetic salt. Yeah. And, and salt, this is another subject. Have you ever heard of the inland customs line in India? How India was conquered was they controlled the flow of salt, and they built a whole hedge right across India to stop people from moving salt. Now, you don't get salt in the hot weather, you die. So what's the state that they're first pushing the no salt in? Florida. What's Florida mostly full of? Old people. Here we are. And then on top of that, salt has these incredible protective qualities because of the electromagnetic nature of it, and especially sea salt, as you said. But yeah, like a famous witch hunter like Matthew Hopkins, right, back in the 16th, 17th century. The only difference between him and Brian Cox is Brian Cox has better teeth. That's it.
What does he do?
Yeah.
Undo it.
I'm not doing it. I'm a professional.
Yes, thank you very much for the film. Very, very interesting. I remember growing up in Bolton, and my mum was telling me that the Pendle witches were just herbalists, and there was a thing going on, the folklore and the fear, as you mentioned. But you also said in the documentary that the women admitted to doing these witchcraft deeds. Is that well documented?
Well, that's the weirdest thing. The two matriarchs, Demdike and Chattox, were almost like in the way before boxers, before they have a fight, they're like, I'm going to take you down. They were almost like that, being interrogated to show off who was the most powerful witch.
That's what they lived off, though, didn't they? Had that fear factor over the
They had numerous chances to save themselves, and they didn't.
Yeah, and they built up I think they were definitely, well, we said they were witch, but I think they built up that fear. They're like the dangerous family that you don't cross. So they lived by that for so many years and profited from it. So it's too late to let it go.
You put your own life in their life. These are people on the margins of society. They had nothing, and they made their living honorably by herbs mostly. Herbal cures, because no one could afford an able doctor. And literally these people lived a kind of life that we could never imagine. And magic was a sort of like the only power that the peasantry had in rural areas, not just here, but everywhere. And I do have a theory that many places, like say, where a lot of coursing went on in rural communities, like in Ireland and like in Sicily, in Italy, that they were all depopulated, and not basically because of famines and wars, and ended up in America. And how do you escape a magical course? You have to move away and change your identity and become a new person. And I often wonder how much of the emigration out of Ireland and Sicily into America was people trying to get away from family hereditary curses by beginning again as an American, that kind of thing.
Right, so speaking of beginning again, I think it's time for lunch. It's 12 o'clock. So thanks, everybody. We'll see you back at 1:15.
Thanks, everybody.